Pam Bondi drops a bombshell. Federal Judge James Boasberg is corrupt, and she's got the evidence to prove it. From secret encrypted messages to a shocking judicial cover-up, Bondi's investigation exposes the shocking truth behind Boasberg's manipulations. The political fallout is intense, and the public is divided. Some see Bondi as a hero, others as a threat. Will she take down the judge, or will the system protect him? Don't miss the jaw-dropping twists. Watch until the end. Chapter 1. The accusation that shook the system. Pam Bondi stood at the podium, her hands clenched around the edges like she was holding the weight of the world. The room was packed, cameras flashing like a storm of lightning. Reporters leaned forward, scribbling every word. It was 8 a.m. on a Monday, but today was no ordinary day. Today, she was about to drop a bombshell that would change everything. Judge James Boasberg is corrupt, she said, her voice sharp and unwavering. And I'm about to expose him for what he really is. The words landed like a punch to the gut. The crowd gasped. Bondi didn't flinch, even though she knew the fight ahead would be brutal. This wasn't just some political rivalry. This wasn't some petty accusation. This was big, real big. Pam Bondi, the Florida Attorney General, was accusing a federal judge of misconduct so severe it could rock the entire justice system. Boasberg wasn't just any judge. He had ties to powerful political insiders, and now Bondi was coming for him. And this wasn't just about a bad decision or a single case gone wrong. This was about a pattern, a cover-up that stretched far beyond what anyone had imagined. I'm not here to play games, Bondi continued, locking eyes with the reporters. Boasberg's actions have put lives at risk, and I won't stand by and let slide. It's time for him to answer for his actions. The room buzzed with nervous energy. Bondi's statement was the kind of thing that could end careers. Hell, it could end entire political careers. She knew the backlash would come fast and hard, but she also knew that the truth was her weapon. But what exactly had Boasberg done? Why was this so personal for Bondi? It all started with one case, a case so controversial, so loaded with potential danger, that would make anyone's head spin. The judge had blocked the deportation of several individuals linked to a dangerous gang. Not just any gang, but one that had left a trail of destruction across several states. These weren't just criminals. They were cartel-level bad news. And Boasberg? He'd issued a restraining order to keep them from being sent back to their home countries. Bondi was furious. Why? Why would a federal judge make such a decision? Why would he stand in the way of justice, especially when people's lives were at stake? The only logical explanation, at least the one Bondi was willing to entertain, was that Boasberg was playing a much deeper game. A game with political strings attached. A game where the rules didn't apply to the powerful. What Boasberg did wasn't just a mistake. Bondi's voice grew louder, more forceful. It was sabotage. Judicial sabotage. The accusation rang out like a bell in the room. Sabotage. Bondi wasn't holding back, and she knew the storm that would come next would be violent. She turned toward her team, sitting at the back of the room. They had all the evidence they needed. Whistleblower testimony, interviews with insiders, and, perhaps most damning of all, encrypted messages from Boasberg's own phone that hinted at something much darker. But Bondi wasn't about to show her hand yet. No, she was going to let the world see it all unfold. In time, as the press conference ended, reporters rushed toward her, bombarding her with questions. Some tried to downplay the accusation, calling it a political attack. Others leaned in, hungry for more details. Bondi pushed through the chaos with the calm of someone who knew she had just made history. One journalist, with a hint of disbelief in his voice, shot a question her way. "You're really going after a sitting federal judge, Pam? That's huge. Don't you think this could backfire on you?" Bondi turned slowly, locking eyes with him. If the system is broken, then it's time to fix it. No one should be above the law. Not even Boasberg. The statement hit harder than any punch she could have thrown. As Bondi walked off the stage, her mind raced. She had just started a war, and it was one that she couldn't back out of. But she also knew she couldn't stop now. The truth needed to come out, no matter the cost. And Boasberg? He wasn't going to get away with this. Back in her office, Bondi sat down at her desk. Her team was already working, gathering evidence that would blow the lid off this scandal. But there was something else, something darker. Bondi could feel it in her gut. Boasberg's decision to block the deportation of those gang members wasn't the whole story. There were more players involved, bigger players, and Bondi was determined to find out who they were. She reached for the file marked Boasberg on her desk. It was thick, too thick to be just about one case. Inside, she found pages and pages of complaints, legal rulings that didn't add up, and connections to figures who had long been rumored to be involved in some shady dealings. Bondi couldn't help but feel the weight of what she was about to uncover. The investigation was just beginning, and already it was clear this wasn't just about a bad judge. This was about a system that needed to be torn down and rebuilt from the ground up. Bondi's phone buzzed. It was a message from an anonymous source. The words sent a chill down her spine. Boasberg is just the tip of the iceberg. This goes all the way to the top. The real question was no longer whether Boasberg would fall. The real question was who else would be dragged down with him. Chapter 2. The Deep Dive. Uncovering the Hidden Truth. Pam Bondi sat at her desk, her hands trembling as she stared at the stack of documents in front of her. The press conference was over, but the real work was just beginning. The accusation against Judge James Boasberg had sent shockwaves through the political world, but now, Pam had to prove it. She knew that one wrong move could destroy everything she'd worked for. The pressure was unbearable. "All right, let's get to work," she muttered, slamming her fist on the desk, trying to shake off the nerves. She had a team of investigators working around the clock to gather every shred of evidence that could take Boasberg down. But this wasn't just about gathering evidence. This was about building a case that no one could ignore. She needed the kind of proof that would make it impossible for anyone, even the most powerful figures, to cover up. Her phone buzzed. It was an encrypted message from one of her key informants, a former insider who had worked closely with Boasberg for years. The message read, "You're getting close, Pam. I got something big, but you need to meet in person." Pam didn't hesitate. She grabbed her coat and headed out the door. This was the break she'd been waiting for. The meeting was set in a quiet, dimly lit cafe on the outskirts of town. Pam arrived early, scanning the room. Her eyes locked on a man sitting in the corner, looking over his shoulder nervously. She knew it was him. She walked over and sat down without a word. The man, a former clerk who had worked under Boasberg, looked around one last time before leaning in. "You're playing a dangerous game," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the clinking of coffee cups. Boasberg isn't just a judge. He's deep in with some serious players, politicians, lobbyists, even international connections. If you think taking him down is going to be easy, you're dead wrong. Pam didn't flinch. "I'm not here for the easy way out. I'm here to bring him down. So what do you have for me?" The man hesitated, then slid a folder across the table. "This is everything. Messages, phone records, testimonies. It's all there." Boasberg didn't just block that deportation order. He's been covering up political corruption for years. He's been coordinating with people who are above the law. You can't let this go. Pam opened the folder, scanning the contents. Her heart raced as she saw what was inside. Encrypted messages, names, dates, locations. This was the smoking gun she needed. But there was one problem. The names on the list were connected to people far more powerful than Boasberg. People who could bury this investigation before it even started. "This is bigger than I thought," Pam muttered under her breath. "Boasberg's just a pawn in a much bigger game." "Exactly," the man replied, his voice shaking with fear. "You're messing with some dangerous people. If you go public with this, they'll come after you. And they'll do it without hesitation." Pam's mind raced as she processed the information. This was no longer just about a corrupt judge. This was about exposing a network of people who had been manipulating the system for years. Boasberg was just the tip of the iceberg, and she was about to dive headfirst into the cold, murky waters. "I'm not backing down," Pam said, her voice low and determined. "I've come this far. I'm not going to stop now." The man looked at her, his eyes filled with fear. "You need to be careful. These people won't hesitate to destroy you. They've done it before, and they'll do it again." Pam nodded. She knew the risks. But she also knew that if she didn't take action now, she would be letting the system continue to be corrupted by people who didn't care about justice. And that was something she couldn't live with. Back in her office, Pam sat down with her team to go over the evidence. It was clear that Boasberg wasn't acting alone. There were too many connections, too many people involved. The encrypted messages revealed discussions about hiding key documents, delaying critical cases, and manipulating rulings in favor of powerful political figures. And it wasn't just one or two instances. This was happening across multiple cases, all with one goal: protecting those who were above the law. "We've got the goods," Pam said, her voice cold as ice. "But we need to make sure we're ready. This isn't just about Boasberg anymore. This is about taking down an entire system." Her team nodded, understanding the gravity of what they were facing. They had already interviewed several whistleblowers who were willing to testify, but they needed more. They needed concrete evidence that would stand up in court. And that meant digging deeper, a lot deeper. Pam's eyes fell on the encrypted message logs. One name kept appearing over and over again: Signalgate. It was a code name, and Pam knew it had to be connected to something much bigger. She'd heard whispers about it, but nothing concrete. Now, it was time to find out what Signalgate really meant. The next few days were a blur. Pam's team worked tirelessly, following every lead, cross-referencing every document. The deeper they went, the more the story started to unfold. Signalgate wasn't just a message app. It was a tool, a method used by Boasberg and his network to conduct illegal communications. They were hiding their tracks. They were covering up the truth. Pam knew they had to move fast. If they didn't act soon, they might lose their chance to expose everything. But every step they took seemed to lead them into even more dangerous waters. This was no longer just about Boasberg. It was about taking down a network of corruption that spanned far beyond the courtroom. "I don't care how deep it goes," Pam said one night, looking her team in the eye. "We're going to expose it all, no matter what it takes." And so, the investigation continued, more intense than ever, more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The pressure was mounting. The stakes were higher than ever before. But Pam was relentless. She wouldn't stop until the truth was out. Boasberg was only the beginning. The real fight was about to start. Chapter 3, Signalgate, the secret that could bring Boasberg down. The files in front of Pam Bondi were like pieces of a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. The deeper she dug into Judge James Boasberg's shady dealings, the more the web seemed to expand. But one piece stood out, a name that had popped up in her investigation, one that sounded like a code. Signalgate. It was a mystery wrapped in an enigma, and Pam could feel that she was just scratching the surface. Sitting at her desk, Pam glanced at the encrypted messages on her screen. Her team had managed to intercept communications, but nothing was making sense. All they had so far were strange conversations, cryptic exchanges, and references to an app called Signal, an encrypted messaging app used by those who didn't want their conversations traced. The people in Boasberg's orbit weren't just trying to avoid the law. They were hiding something bigger, and this app was their tool of choice. "Pam, you need to see this," one of her investigators, Lucas, called from the other side of the office. His voice had that edge of excitement and fear that meant he'd found something important. Pam grabbed the files and walked over to Lucas's desk, where he had the decrypted messages pulled up. She scanned the screen, her heart pounding. The first message was from an anonymous source, dated months before the first controversial ruling Boasberg had made about the deportation case. "Make sure this stays off the record. Boasberg's involved. We need him to delay the deportations. He's our guy." Pam's stomach sank. This was it, the smoking gun. But she needed more. One message wasn't enough to bring down a federal judge. She needed context, names, dates, anything that would tie Boasberg to these shady characters more concretely. Lucas clicked to the next message. It was even more damning. Boasberg confirmed. He'll stall the hearing. He said the right people will make sure nothing happens. Right people? Pam murmured, her mind racing. What was Boasberg involved in? Who were these right people? Was he taking bribes? Or was this just some high-level political game? Pam wasn't the type to shy away from a challenge. But this felt like walking into a storm without an umbrella. Every new message added weight to the pile. It was becoming clear that Boasberg wasn't just a judge making mistakes. He was actively participating in something much larger, something far more dangerous. "What's the next move?" Lucas asked, his voice low. Pam didn't answer immediately. She was piecing it together in her head. She couldn't go public with this. At least, not yet. She needed to go deeper, find out who was pulling Boasberg's strings. She had a hunch that if she followed the signal trail, it would lead her somewhere that no one had dared to go before. "I'll need access to more. Find out who Boasberg's been in contact with through this app. We need to know who else is in on this," Pam said, her voice cold and determined. The next few days were a blur. Pam's team dug into the Signal app like their lives depended on it. They pulled up old chat logs, cross-referenced names, and tracked the flow of money and connections that tied back to Boasberg. But nothing prepared Pam for what they uncovered. One of the names that kept appearing in the encrypted messages was a top lobbyist, a man who had a hand in everything from local elections to federal appointments. His name was Mark Kincaid, and according to the messages, Boasberg was more than just a judge for him. He was a pawn. Pam stood over the files. Her eyes narrowed as she read through the exchanges. "Kincaid is pushing for a delay on the immigration cases. If Boasberg can hold things up a little longer, we could get a better deal. Don't let him slip up." It was clear as day now. Boasberg wasn't just blocking deportations on his own whim. He was under the thumb of someone powerful, someone who knew how to manipulate the system for personal gain. And that wasn't just a minor infraction. It was a full-blown scandal. "All right, we got the pieces. But this is bigger than we thought," Pam said to Lucas, who was watching her closely. "It's not just about Boasberg anymore. Kincaid's involved, and he's got connections that reach far beyond this city." Lucas nodded. "This could get ugly, Pam. Kincaid's got allies in the highest places. You're about to go up against a whole network of corruption." "I didn't get into this job to back down," Pam replied, her tone resolute. "We're going all the way with this." That night, Pam couldn't sleep. Her mind kept racing back to the messages, to the name Kincaid, to the feeling that something terrible was just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. She knew that exposing Boasberg and Kincaid would be a fight, but what she didn't know was how far this thing would go. How many more names would she have to add to the list? The next day, Pam called a meeting with her closest allies. She couldn't afford to waste time. If she was going to take down a judge, a lobbyist, and possibly an entire network of people who control the legal system, she needed everyone on the same page. "You guys ready to take this to the next level?" she asked, her voice sharp with anticipation. Her team looked at each other before nodding in agreement. "We got the evidence. We know who's behind this. It's time to go public," Lucas said, his voice confident, but with a hint of caution. "But we need to be careful. These people will fight back, and they'll fight dirty." Pam's eyes burned with determination. "Then we'll fight back harder." By the end of the week, Pam was prepared to make her move. She had everything she needed: boiling evidence, strong witnesses, and enough dirt on Boasberg and Kincaid to bury them both. But Pam was about to learn that when you go up against the powerful, the game changes. They had their own set of rules, and they weren't afraid to break them. The question now wasn't just whether she could bring Boasberg and Kincaid down. The real question was how much of a fight would it take, and how much damage she would have to endure to expose the truth. As Pam stood at the edge of what felt like a precipice, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't backing down. This was her fight, and she was ready to make them all answer for what they'd done. Chapter 4. Political Storm. The fallout begins. Pam Bondi stood in front of the television, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of the desk. The news had just broken, and it was everywhere. Headlines flashed across the screen, and reporters were already scrambling to get the story, twisting the narrative in every direction. She had known this moment was coming, but nothing could prepare her for the ferocity of the backlash. Political hit job. Bondi targets federal judge with unsubstantiated claims, one headline screamed. Another report called it a desperate ploy by a politician facing a tough election season. Unbelievable, Pam muttered to herself, frustration mounting. The media had already framed her as the villain. The whispers had started before she even finished her press conference, calling her accusations politically motivated. Critics were everywhere, already painting her as someone using her office to settle scores. But Pam didn't care. She had known the risk from the start. This is just the beginning, she told herself, determined to hold her ground. But still, the pressure was mounting. The media storm was growing, and Pam could feel the eyes of the entire country on her. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her team. Lucas had some bad news. Pam, we've got an issue. Boasberg's lawyer just filed for a gag order. If the judge signs off, this investigation could be shut down fast. Pam cursed under her breath. Boasberg wasn't wasting any time. He was already using his legal connections to fight back. She couldn't let this slide. Not now. She knew she had to go on the offensive. Turning to her assistant, Pam barked, "Get me Boasberg's lawyer." Now, it wasn't long before Pam found herself in another battle, this time with one of the most seasoned and ruthless defense attorneys in the game, William Carter. Carter was known for his ability to win cases by any means necessary, using his vast network and influence to tilt the scales of justice in his favor. If Boasberg's people were getting involved, it meant the stakes had just gone through the roof. She met Carter in a private conference room in a high-rise downtown. He was already seated when she walked in, leaning back in his chair with that smug, self-assured look that Pam had seen in so many of the system's insiders. He didn't rise to greet her. He didn't need to. He was already playing his hand. "Pam, I've heard the chatter. You're digging into things you shouldn't be. I'd strongly advise you back off before this gets out of control," Carter said, his voice low and steady. He leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "Boasberg has friends in high places. You really want to go to war with him?" Pam didn't flinch. She'd been preparing for this. "I'm not backing down, Carter. If you think you can intimidate me with your threats, you're wrong. Boasberg is guilty. I've got the proof." Carter smirked. "Proof? Please. What do you have? A couple of encrypted messages? You're playing with fire, and you're about to get burned." "I'm not scared of you, or your threats," Pam shot back, her voice like steel. "The people deserve to know the truth. If you're really that confident in your guy, then let's see him defend his actions in court. But don't try to silence me, Carter, because if you do, it won't just be Boasberg who comes under fire. It'll be the entire system. And trust me, people are tired of being lied to." Carter paused, staring at her for a long moment, sizing her up. Pam could feel the tension in the room, the unspoken challenge hanging in the air. He wasn't used to losing, and he certainly wasn't used to being spoken to like this. But Pam wasn't afraid. She had nothing to lose. "Fine," Carter finally said, a sneer crossing his face. "But you won't last. You're out of your depth. We'll see how long you can keep this charade up." Pam didn't wait for the meeting to end. She had enough of Carter's games. She had just received more bad news. Her political opponents were already using this scandal to discredit her. They'd started circulating the narrative that Pam was just trying to make a name for herself, accusing her of overreaching and playing dirty politics. The media had jumped on it, and the public was divided. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from a trusted source. It was a whistleblower inside Boasberg's circle, someone who had agreed to meet Pam in secret. The message was simple but chilling. "Boasberg isn't the only one with skeletons. Kincaid's got dirt on some very powerful people. He's pulling strings you haven't even begun to uncover." Pam's heart skipped a beat. Kincaid again. This wasn't just about Boasberg anymore. She was starting to realize how much deeper the rabbit hole went. She quickly made arrangements to meet the whistleblower at a discreet location. Time was running out, and she needed to get all the intel she could before the system closed ranks completely. The meeting took place in a small, inconspicuous diner on the outskirts of town. Pam sat in a booth, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. The place was quiet, too quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of a jukebox playing in the background. She waited, tense and alert, until the door opened. A man in his late 40s walked in, wearing a worn leather jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He slid into the seat across from Pam, giving her a quick, nervous glance. "Do you have the proof?" Pam asked, cutting to the chase. The man nodded. "Yeah, I've got it. But you need to understand something. This goes way beyond Boasberg and Kincaid. There are people involved in this mess who can make all of this disappear with a snap of their fingers. You're about to step into a war, Pam. A war you can't win alone. Pam leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. Who else is involved? He slid a folder across the table, thick with documents and photos. This is the start. I've been tracking Kincaid's dealings for years. He's got connections in Congress, in the White House. Hell, even the DOJ has been on his payroll. Boasberg is just the tip of the iceberg. Pam flipped through the folder, her stomach dropping with each page. This wasn't just about corruption. This was about a full-blown conspiracy that had been operating under the radar for years. The system was rigged, and Pam had just uncovered the first real proof of it. She slammed the folder shut, her jaw clenched with rage. It's worse than I thought. The man gave her a sad look. I told you, if you push this, you won't just take down Boasberg. You'll take down everyone. But you need to decide if you're ready for that. Pam stood up, her resolve hardening. I'm ready. Let the storm come. As Pam walked out of the diner, her mind was racing. The fallout from this investigation was just beginning. Boasberg, Kincaid, and the system they had built, none of it would survive the truth. But the question was no longer if they would be taken down. The question was how far Pam was willing to go to make it happen, and how much of herself she would have to sacrifice to bring the system crashing down. The storm was coming, and Pam wasn't backing down. Chapter 5. Boasberg's Dirty Past. The web of corruption unravels. Pam Bondi sat at her desk, staring at the documents scattered in front of her. The investigation into Judge James Boasberg had started as a mission to expose his wrongdoings in a single case, but now it was so much more. What started as a judge blocking deportations had quickly spiraled into a full-blown conspiracy involving political elites, shady connections, and decades of questionable rulings. Pam was no longer just hunting down a corrupt judge. She was going after a system that had been rigged for years. Where's the rest of the intel? Pam snapped, pacing back and forth in her office. She had just uncovered a troubling connection, one that she knew could be the key to everything, but there were still too many unanswered questions. She needed more. Lucas, one of her top investigators, stood beside her desk, flipping through a thick file. We've dug into Boasberg's past, Pam, and the deeper we go, the more we're starting to see a pattern. He's been involved in some seriously questionable decisions, especially when it comes to immigration cases. But it's not just that. There are people, powerful people, who have been pulling his strings for years. Pam didn't have time for fluff. Get to the point, Lucas. He handed her a set of photos, the kind that no one wanted to see. There was Boasberg, shaking hands with well-known political figures, all smiles, but something about the look in his eyes was unsettling. These weren't the photos of a judge doing his job with integrity. They were the photos of a man who had sold out. Here, Lucas said, pointing at the first image. Boasberg with a lobbyist named Mark Kincaid. You remember him, right? He's the one behind a lot of the shady deals we've been tracking. Kincaid isn't just any lobbyist, he's a kingmaker. If Boasberg is hanging out with him, it's not a coincidence. Pam's stomach twisted. She'd already heard Kincaid's name mentioned a dozen times, but seeing these pictures, seeing Boasberg cozying up with one of the most powerful men in the room, made it real. This was bigger than she thought. The ties ran deeper than she could have ever imagined. And this? Pam asked, flipping to the next photo. This one was a meeting between Boasberg and a congressman, shaking hand with a bill that seemed to have Boasberg's approval. Are we supposed to believe this is just business as usual? No way, Lucas said, shaking his head. This was about more than just a bill. Boasberg has been involved in some high-level decisions that have benefited Kincaid and other insiders. We're talking about rulings that had huge financial implications. These weren't just accidents. Pam clenched her fists, trying to control the wave of anger that hit her. She had suspected corruption, but this was a full-scale operation. Boasberg wasn't just a bad judge. He was a cog in a much larger machine. And the more she uncovered, the more she realized that the machine ran far deeper than she could have imagined. Later that day, Pam stood in front of a wall of documents, piecing everything together. Her office was a war room now, cluttered, chaotic, but organized in a way that only Pam could understand. She had the evidence. She had names. The connections were starting to make sense. She wasn't just fighting Boasberg anymore. She was fighting an entire network of corruption that stretched into the heart of the political system. The game had changed, and Pam knew she was in too deep to back out now. Her phone buzzed with a text from her team. "We got something big. Boasberg's rulings aren't just politically motivated. He's been hiding his financial ties to Kincaid and others in plain sight. He's been using his position to steer millions of dollars in contract to companies linked to Kincaid. And it's all connected to immigration." Pam's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't believe it. But as she read through the message, it all clicked. The deportation orders, the delays, the strategic rulings that seemed to always favor Kincaid's interests. Boasberg hadn't been acting on his own. He'd been getting paid, manipulating the system to line his pockets, and everyone else's. "That son of a bitch," Pam muttered under her breath, her blood boiling. "This is worse than we thought." She picked up the phone and dialed Lucas. "I need everything on Kincaid. All of it. If this goes as deep as I think it does, we can bring them all down, Boasberg, Kincaid, and anyone else who's involved. But we need to go all in." The next few days were a blur of activity. Pam's team worked around the clock, digging through financial records, tracking down anonymous sources, and connecting the dots. And it wasn't just Boasberg's actions they were uncovering. It was the entire system that had allowed people like him to get away with it for so long. One evening, as Pam was reviewing the final pieces of the puzzle, Lucas came into her office, his face grim. "We found something," he said, holding a thick file in his hands. "It's a document from Boasberg's personal bank account. There's a transfer of over $200,000 to a shell company linked to Kincaid's lobbying firm. It's a pay-for-play scheme, Pam. This wasn't about making decisions. This was about money." Pam's hand shook as she flipped through the file. The evidence was right there, clear as day.